Hello everybody and welcome to the Comics Alliance Top 5. My name is Chris Sims and this week we're getting a little spooky by talking about the 5 best Dracula stories in comics. Now Dracula is of course one of the greatest characters in fiction. Movies, video games, and of course comic books have told us a lot of stories about the King of the Vampires, the Lord of the Undead, Count Dracula himself. And these are the 5 best. Starting off at number 5, we have the comic book adaptation of Bram Stoker's Dracula. Or, to be more specific, Francis Ford Coppola's Bram Stoker's Dracula. The movie starring Gary Oldman as Dracula and Keanu Reeves as Jonathan Harker. Now, I will be the first to admit that this is not my favorite version of Dracula. But the comic book adaptation of the movie adaptation of the novel does have one thing going for it. It was drawn by Hellboy creator Mike Mignola, and looks amazing. Plus, it has that scene where Dracula becomes a vampire by stabbing a church, and the church bleeds. That is the most metal thing that has ever happened. At number 4, we have the first appearance of the Marvel Comics version of Dracula on this list, but I assure you, not the last, the Montesi formula. This was actually a crossover between Marvel's long-running Tomb of Dracula and Doctor Strange, and involved the Darkhold, the Book of Sins, a book so evil that you become evil just by holding it. It included the Montesi formula, which was a magic spell that would destroy all vampires on Earth, which Doctor Strange used. He ended up killing Dracula at the end of the story. Unfortunately for Doctor Strange and, humanity, killing Dracula doesn't usually stick. That's kind of his deal. But it's still a pretty great story, and it's full of amazing lines of Dracula calling Doctor Strange a witless clod. At number 3, probably the strangest Dracula comic of all time. A short-lived series published by Dell Comics in 1966 about Dracula as a superhero. Now this was not the Dracula that we know. It was a descendant of Dracula who gained Dracula powers through a serum that he made with bat blood, moved to America, took the name Alucard, get it, and became a crime-busting vigilante alongside his girlfriend, whose superhero name was Fleda, short for Fledermaus. Dracula had an oath that he said before heading off to fight crime, which was, "I pledge by the strange powers which have become mine to fight against the injustice, corruption, evil, and greed, which fills this earth, in the hopes that somehow my example will be an example to all men." If you want to set a good example, I would suggest not calling yourself Dracula. I mean, that's silly. Why would anyone like a hero who dresses up like some kind of bat creature? It's not gonna work. Coming in at number 2, we have one of my favorite comic book stories of all time, Dracula or No, Punch Dracula, by Christopher Hastings. This was an issue of Hastings' popular webcomic, The Adventures of Dr. McNinja, and involved the eponymous doctor, who is also a ninja, being taken to Dracula's castle on the moon and being asked to help him discover what happens after you die. Dracula, of course, doesn't know, being immortal. Now, this should give you an idea of how awesome Dracula is in comic books. This is not the only comic on the list in which Dracula has a castle on the moon. It is, however, the only one where Dracula gets in a fistfight with a ninja, and is then a robot who is surfed back to Earth. You can read it for free, and if you haven't done that already, what are you doing with your life? This comic is amazing. But it is not the number 1 story on this list. That story is Vampire State from Captain Britain and MI-13 by Paul Cornell, Leonard Kirk, and Mike Collins. And yes, this is the other story about Dracula having a castle on the moon. This one gets the advantage though, because Dracula not only has a castle on the moon, on the dark side of course, he also uses that castle to launch a war against England. And when I say launch, I am specifically referring to the vampires that he fires out of cannons from the moon at England, before hopping in his spacefaring pirate ship and sailing on down to fight MI-13 by himself. The core of this story is that Blade, the vampire hunter, you've probably heard of him, has joined up with MI-13 and Dracula wants to kill him last. And it is pretty amazing. The only problem I have with this story is that Union Jack, who is a British superhero built entirely around killing vampires, only makes a cameo appearance and doesn't really get in on the action. Still, it has racist, sexist Dracula coming down to Earth and getting into a fight with a female Muslim doctor who has gained the power of Excalibur. and that's pretty great. That'll do it for the best Dracula comic stories of all time. Hope you enjoy them. If you have a favorite Dracula comic, why don't you let us know at comicsalliance.com, leave a comment, or hit me up on Twitter at TheISB, that's TheISB. Thank you all for listening, have a spooky week. We'll be back again with another scarifying top 5 list. Have a good one, everybody.